This stuff is not going to stop. It's not going to stop because the left has decided to mainstream it. You cannot hug Luigi Mangione and pretend you hate political violence. You cannot celebrate and hug Hassan Piker and claim to oppose political violence. You can't spread wild, evidence-free conspiracy theories about the president of the United States, calling him a pedophile, the Antichrist, a child killer, Hitler, and then pretend that you're kind of shocked when someone picks up a gun and tries to kill him for the third time.
So Ben Shapiro just dropped this breakdown of the third Trump assassination attempt, and he's exposing something critical: how left-wing rhetoric creates permission structures for violence. We're talking about Luigi Mangione worship, radical conspiracy theories, and polling data showing Democrats are 4 times more likely to justify political violence. This is explosive.
Apparently, he graduated Caltech in 2017 with a 3.0 GPA and a BS in mechanical engineering, and then he graduated later with a master's in computer science. Apparently, he worked a few months for a 3D printing company. He did some engineering, and then he did 7 years of self-employment as an indie game developer. And he was a teacher in California as well. Apparently, he was labeled Teacher of the Month, where he was teaching in California. But what were his actual political views?
This detail is crucial. Cole Allen wasn't some unhinged dropout. Caltech graduate, Teacher of the Month, mechanical engineer. When educated, successful people turn to political violence. It's proof that dangerous ideology is penetrating mainstream discourse. The radicalization is working on smart people, which makes it far more terrifying.
So the shooter had a bunch of social media posts, and it is precisely what you would think. First of all, he had a manifesto, which we'll get to in a minute, but you probably could have predicted his manifesto if you had seen his social media. He was very active on a left-wing version of X called Blue Sky, which is filled with nut jobs, filled with radicals. So on Blue Sky, for example, he had posted just a few days ago, he had reposted a person saying every single one of these effing charlatans would support the Antichrist himself if he spouted enough anti-immigrant and anti-trans bleep as he rode through town. And then he tweeted himself, he put out a statement, delete everything after himself, and add an S directly after support. So, again, the idea is that the president is the Antichrist, essentially, and that all these people all of his supporters support the Antichrist.
Calling someone the Antichrist isn't hyperbole. It's dehumanization. Once you convince someone their political opponent is literally evil incarnate, violence becomes a moral imperative. This is exactly how genocides start. First, you strip away humanity through language. Then action follows inevitably.
So notice the language there: pedophile, rapist, and traitor. There's no evidence that the president is a pedophile or a rapist or a traitor. The pedophile accusation comes from the extraordinary stupidity and venality of people claiming that the president is in fact engaged in a pedophilic cover-up with regard to Jeffrey Epstein. Again, that is a conspiracy theory promoted very widely on the left and fairly widely on the grievance party right. The suggestion that he is a rapist, again, unevidenced. The suggestion that he is a traitor, that of course is the kind of language that is frequently used by all sorts of people on the Democratic right and in the grievance, on the Democratic Party left and on the grievance party right.
These aren't policy disagreements anymore. Pedophile, rapist, traitor are accusations that demand violent response. When you falsely label someone as harming children, you're essentially telling unstable people that killing them would be heroic. The Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theories are particularly toxic because they involve children.
So the Epstein conspiracy theorizing has very real-world consequences, just as Pizzagate had very real-world consequences. When you spread baseless trash about people trafficking in children, nut jobs might go and do something about it. He then suggested Secret Service, their targets only if necessary, and to be incapacitated non-lethally if possible, aka I hope they're wearing body armor because sensor mass with shotguns messes up people who aren't. And then he specified that hotel security, Capitol Police, National Guard, hotel employees, guests are not targets, if at all possible, unless they shoot at me, but that he would still go through most everyone here to get to the targets if it were absolutely necessary, on the basis that most people chose to attend a speech by a pedophile, rapist, and traitor, again, that language, and are thus complicit. But I really hope it doesn't come to that.
Notice how conspiracy thinking expands the target list. First Trump, then Patel, then anyone attending his events becomes complicit. This is radicalization 101. Start with the main enemy, then justify attacking broader circles. Hotel guests became legitimate targets simply for listening to a speech.
I've been talking about this for a long time. Permission structures for violence. Ideologies and ideas are not all created equal. It would have been kind of shocking if this person had written a manifesto about how he was upset over the Trump tax cuts. People don't get shot in the United States over differential tax rates. So we need to discuss which ideas and ideologies are the most likely to lead to violence, because they're not all equivalent. They're not.
Exactly right. Normal politics doesn't create assassins. Nobody shoots politicians over tax policy or infrastructure spending. But when you convince people that their opponents are pedophiles destroying children, violence becomes self-defense. The rhetoric itself is the weapon that creates killers.
Ideologies and ideas that lead to violence share, typically, an evidence-free conspiratorial view of the universe, in which shadowy forces of powerful people are responsible for all of your failures and shortcomings, and in which the things they say aren't arguments, but actual facades for power. So there's a group of people that are victimizing you. They're shadowy and they are nefarious, conspiratorial, and able to get away with true horrific crimes. Second, ideologies and ideas that lead to violence share a belief that you, your group, people that you care about are being targeted for destruction by this shadowy cabal. And if that's true, then number 3, violence is actually a form of self-defense.
This 3-step formula works across all extremist movements: QAnon, radical Islam, white supremacy, and now mainstream leftism. Shadowy enemies, existential threat, violence as defense. What's terrifying is seeing this pattern adopted by supposedly respectable Democratic politicians and media figures.
Yeah, that's the same sort of ideology that leads to the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO. The idea, as Hassan Piker put it in an interview with the New York Times 5 days ago, that this United Healthcare CEO was engaged in social violence. He was part of a predatory group of people who were literally killing people for profit. And so you can understand why somebody might want to shoot it. Well, we don't, but you can understand. I mean, it's totally understandable. That is a permission structure for violence. That is a permission structure for violence.
Hassan Piker literally justified the United Healthcare murder by calling it response to social violence. This is identical logic. Paint your enemy as evil, claim they're killing people, then act shocked when someone takes action. The permission structure is identical across both shootings.
Representative Hakeem Jeffries, for example, he says that Republican policies do violence to the American people.
Republican policies are doing violence to the American people.
Again, violence to the American people. It's not just the Republican policies are wrong. They're malign. They're designed to be malign. And this sort of approach to politics has consequences. The permission structure for violence for the congressional baseball shooting about a decade ago was the Bernie Sanders line that people who disagreed with him about Obamacare or nationalized health care want 50,000 people to die. That they are literally killing grandma because of their policy, and they want grandma to die. That sort of approach to politics is a dangerous approach to politics.
Representative Hakeem Jeffries saying Republican policies do violence to Americans is textbook permission structure language. Bernie Sanders claiming healthcare opponents want 50,000 people to die led directly to the congressional baseball shooting in 2017. This rhetoric has a body count.
Of that 38.5%, 56% was left of center, only 20% was right of center. How about justification for the murder of a political leader, just overall, not named, Democrats versus Republicans? So on this chart, a score of 1 means political violence is never justified. 59% of Democrats and 71% of Republicans say political violence is never justified. A score of 2 to 7, some violence is justified. Okay, the chart shows that, again, Democrats outnumber Republicans all the way through. All the way through. So if you believe that violence is justified in political life, you are significantly more likely to be a Democrat than you are to be a Republican.
These numbers are devastating for the both sides narrative. Nearly 40% of Americans think murdering Trump would be justified, with Democrats outnumbering Republicans almost 3-1. This isn't fringe thinking anymore. It's mainstream Democratic opinion that political violence is acceptable.
Only 55% say no. Like a bare majority say that violence in politics can't be justified among very liberal people. Among liberal people, 17% say violence can be justified. 68% say no. Among conservatives, only 6% say political violence can be justified, compared to 83% who say no. Okay, those are shocking numbers, or should be shocking numbers to you, because what they find, again, is that if you are very liberal, you are 4 times as likely as if you are a conservative to say that violence can be justified in politics.
4 times more likely. That's not a marginal difference. That's a categorical difference in how left and right view political violence. Very liberal Americans are overwhelmingly more willing to justify killing their political opponents. The data destroys any pretense of moral equivalence here.
One of the reasons they're skewing young is because everyone in the younger age group is extraordinarily online. The online incentive structure to be passionate, to be crazy, the echo chamber that facilitates violent language. Again, charged language tends to draw higher numbers, period. This is always true. Not every word is created equal. When people curse, it goes directly to your limbic system. Like it has a different effect on your brain than it does if I use the word trash versus if I use the word that has a different impact on your brain. And the same thing is true if I use passionate language. If Hassan Piker says, cut their guts out, let them writhe on stage, that is a very different appeal than I disagree with that person, and I'll tell you why I think his policies are wrong. And when it comes to the sort of virality that can be achieved online, the former will generally do better than the latter, because invocations of passion tend to hit harder, particularly in short clips when they're fed to you over and over and over and over. So
social media algorithms reward extreme rhetoric with engagement, and young people are most susceptible because they're constantly online. Passionate, violent language literally triggers different brain responses than reasoned debate. Hassan Piker's cut their guts out rhetoric is algorithmic poison designed for maximum psychological impact.
they are not. Conspiracism is bad. It is not just bad in terms of utilitarian. It is wrong. It is evil. Conspiracism, unbacked by evidence, generates violence. It generates mental illness. It generates stupidity, and it wrecks our politics and our civilization as a whole. That is why there's a difference between saying, I disagree with President Trump on tariffs, or I think what he did on January 6th is quite awful and wrong, and saying the president is a pedophile and a rapist and a traitor who should be destroyed because he's blowing up little girls.
This distinction is everything. Legitimate criticism versus dehumanizing conspiracy theories. You can oppose Trump's policies without calling him a child trafficking antichrist, but that requires intellectual honesty, which conspiracism destroys. Evidence-free accusations about pedophilia cross every moral line.
Okay, there's no evidence whatsoever this was staged. There's no evidence Butler was staged. There's no evidence Charlie Kirk's murder was staged or manipulated by the widow or any of that crap. Conspiratorial worldviews are disgusting. They are not just fun and games. They are disgusting because they are claiming things that are evidence-free about other people that lead people to believe that they are part of some coterie of evil people manipulating behind the scenes. The president was asked about the claims that this was staged. He said a lot of these people are sick. He is not wrong.
The instant, staged, trending shows how conspiracy thinking has become reflexive on the left. No evidence needed, just immediate denial of reality. This isn't skepticism, it's mental illness. When your first response to attempted murder is fake, you've abandoned rational discourse entirely.
That is our most important obligation, not to justify your feelings, not to pretend that your feelings of being victimized are somehow justified by a conspiracy that we can't quite manage. We have to follow the truth. We have to follow the evidence. Here, Cenk is saying precisely the opposite. Nowhere in here does he say, by the way, it wasn't staged. Nowhere in there, right? He says, you heard speculation. It might be staged. Well, why were people speculating? Well, because people lie to you all the time and we don't trust anything. Rightly so. Yeah, at some point you might want to say, guys, it wasn't staged. There's no evidence it was staged. At some point you might want to do that. But again, we have moved beyond the realm of facts into the realm of narrative.
This is why independent journalism matters. The commitment to truth over narrative validation. Too many commentators prioritize making their audience feel good over reporting facts. Cenk Uygur couldn't even say the shooting wasn't staged because conspiracy theories serve his audience's emotional needs.
There is a soul sickness in the country, but that soul sickness does not start with President Trump.
The soul sickness starts with left-wing ideology that justifies violence as moral action. We've created a generation that believes killing political opponents is heroic, then acts surprised when they follow through. This isn't Trump's fault. It's the logical endpoint of dehumanizing rhetoric.